I always start before that starts. But good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Climate Justice Working Group meeting. We will try to respect everybody's time and keeping it to a 2-hour time limit today. I know that everybody has a lot to do, so we won't sort of dilly-dally a little bit. For everybody, oh, sorry, next slide, please. Just as a reminder of meeting protocols for everyone observing this meeting either live or in WebEx. This is the meeting of the Climate Justice Working Group. It is not a public hearing or forum. We will not be taking testimony or questions from the public during this meeting. Only Climate Justice Working Group members are permitted to discuss, deliberate, or vote during these meetings. If you are in attendance, publicly or physically, we ask that you be respectful of these proceedings and refrain from raising your hand or attempting to draw any attention to yourself or injecting at any point. As always, folks, to reduce noise in the rooms or during the meeting, we ask to keep rooms muted. Please raise your hand and we'll unmute you and unmute your room. And since this meeting is going to be broadcast via WebEx, please try to state your name before speaking for transcription purposes, and when possible, please remain on camera. Next slide. So we're going to go over the agenda quickly. Next slide, please. So first we'll start with a roll call, and then quorum being present, we will approve the minutes from our last few meetings. We'll do a vote on the Climate Justice Working Group bylaws, a quick update on DEP, or Division of Environmental Permits 23.1, which is the guidance for implementing Section 7.3 of the Climate Act. We will also, hopefully by then, have an opportunity to discuss the draft benefits and investment strategy in accordance with the CLCPA. And then we'll just discuss, some of the criteria for the review process and do our last steps on everything. So I say let's move forward with the roll call. I'm going to start with folks who are physically present in accessible locations. We'll start here in central office here in Albany. You have me, Alana Cadell-Tucky.
Hi, this is Neil Muscatello from DOH.
Amy Klein, Capital Roots.
Thank you, guys. We're going to move next to New York City.
Elizabeth Frick, Department of Labor.
Sonal Jessel, we act for environmental justice.
And then we'll move to Region 5, Raybrook.
Jill Hink with INCA.
And Region 8 in Avon.
Hey, McHugh-Griff. Hi, everybody.
And I see that Kayla's on. Kayla, are you on for Region 9?
We're here.
Okay, and who do we have in Region 9?
Rawa's here.
Hi, it's Rawa.
Hi, Rawa.
Good to be here with you.
I'm sorry, a lot of technology.
That's okay. And online, I see Elizabeth.
Buenos días, Elizabeth Jean-Pierre, UpRose.
And I see Eddie. You're muted, Eddie, if you're talking. Still can't hear you.
You could be double muted on your end, Eddie. Do you have a phone that you're using or a headset that may be muted? Okay, we're still not hearing you, but I'm gonna send you a message in the chat in case you need to call. We could try to figure it out. So give me a sec.
All right. So we do have a quorum present, so we can move forward with voting and approving the minutes from our last couple of meetings and voting on the bylaws. We'll go with the minutes first because, I want to make sure that we can hear Eddie when we talk a little bit more about the bylaws. But before we move forward with voting on the minutes, does anyone have any changes or amendments for the minutes before we move forward with voting to approve? I don't see any hands raised, so I will make a motion to approve the minutes from August 29th, October 4th, And, what was it? Sorry. Let me go back through. I just need to look at it again. Make sure I get the right ones. Yes, June, yes. Minutes from June 21st, October 29th, and August 29th, and October 4th. Like I said, I will make that motion. Do I have a second? Amy seconds. So all in support, please signal your approval by raise of your hand. Sorry, we're just going through the the layout so I can see everybody. It's a little hard to see everyone. All right, don't see anyone in opposition, so the motion to move the meeting minutes to being approved and updating that on the website has passed. And have we fixed any audio issues?
Eddie, I sent you a message in the chat about some options for fixing, or you can give me a call at the number I put in there if you need help.
This is Abby, and I'm sorry, we're having video issues here in Avon, so I think my camera will probably be off for most or all of the meeting.
It's always something.
Okay, so we're still unable to hear you here, Eddie. I can see you talking, but I can't hear you, so, yeah. Feel free to use the chat, but we'll try to fix your audio issues as we move forward. Okay, next we will move to the approval of the bylaws. In June, just to remind everyone, we discussed the addition of bylaws for governing procedures moving forward, such as meetings, appointments, and terms. This included a discussion surrounding the first draft of the bylaws. Technical staff made revisions based on everyone's feedback, and we sent you an updated draft of those in anticipation of this meeting. So just as a reminder, the purpose of this will be to codify rules and procedures for the Climate Justice Working Group. The proposed bylaws include a 3-year term with the option of a subsequent term. It indicates that representatives may resign at any time. It outlines officers and legal counsel responsibilities, powers and duties, meeting procedures, and provisions relating to the treatment of confidential information, conflicts of interest, and gifts. So these bylaws will also incorporate the provisions of the resolution regarding virtual participation in meetings that was passed on October 20th of 2022. And it will also address a recent amendment to the open meetings law that allows for any members with disabilities that are unable to attend meetings in person to count towards a quorum, provided that confirmation of the disability is provided. So since the meeting in June, we made those changes to incorporate all of your feedback, which also incorporates the attendance requirement, alternate member to address quorum issues, removing the term chair from the bylaws, and instead it just calls out the DEC's Office of Environmental Justice as having certain responsibilities. That includes running the meetings, being point person for coordination, et cetera. It also provides an explanation for the process of candidacy. It revises the definition of a quorum to match the existing law, and it's adding language regarding confidentiality over the potential confidential information the working group receives. So are there any changes, concerns, or discussion points that we'd like to raise before we vote?
Alana, before we do the vote or deliberations, I just want to remind folks to put yourself on camera to comply with the open meetings law requirement for attending virtually. Thanks. When you're speaking.
Yep, we did hear from Abby that there were some technical difficulties with her camera. But yeah, so folks, if you are not currently on camera and you don't have camera difficulties and you can please be on camera, that would be great. Okay. Seeing no hands up. Oh, do I see a hand? Sorry. Okay, I did not. All right, just making sure. So, are there any additional changes or concerns or discussion we would like to have? Yep, Eddie is off camera, he's trying to join by phone. We'll try to wait for Eddie before we move forward. But it's just in case if anybody has any, discussion points they want to add.
Hey Eddie, I don't know if it's possible, but when if you're able to put your camera on, even if you can't talk through it, and you know, would vote through the phone, that would be great for the open meetings law purposes.
Okay, seeing Eddie says to keep moving on until he gets on. Okay, for these bylaws to take effect, we need a majority of working group members to approve the measure. So like we said, we see that there's no discussion on this member and, sorry, on this. So what we'll do is we will move forward with the vote. Oh, sorry, Eddie is voted yes. All right, Eddie's already voted. So I was gonna first ask for a motion to move the vote forward. Yep, so, and second from you, Neil?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to go person by person. Eddie, you already voted yes, so we'll start with Eddie. Eddie votes yes. We'll come to myself. Alana Kinosaki, I'm also a yes.
Yes.
Neil Telio, yes.
Amy Klein, yes.
Yes. Elizabeth, up here?
Yes. Yes.
Elizabeth is a yes. Okay, let's move to Abby.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Abby. Jill?
Yes.
Thank you, Jill. Sonal?
Yes.
And Elizabeth?
Yes.
And Rawa?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for this. The bylaws are now passed. We will move forward with making sure that those are implemented in the future and making sure that those are available for anybody to review on the Climate Justice Working Group website. So thank you very much for that.
Alana,
yeah.
sorry, just want to weigh in. I know a couple folks can't be on video, Eddie and Abby, because of technical difficulties, but we still got 8 votes, so that still met the majority of the Climate Justice Working Group members for the vote.
And we could still see, now does it count, we could see Eddie.
Oh, he was on? Okay, thank you.
Didn't
see him.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so it is not yet 2:30, so Michael DeRomeo will be with us at about 2:30 to do sort of an update on our the benefits and investment strategy, but we will move forward and discuss a quick sort of update on the policy for 7.3, which is our policy on permitting in disadvantaged communities, or DEP 23-1. So, do we have a slide 10 here? Sure.
You can at least hear what's going on.
Nope, sorry. Yep, we're fine. So just to update everybody, sorry, hearing that. DEC has a draft policy out relating to permitting and in disadvantaged communities out for public comment. The policy is called DEP 23-1. It's providing guidance for DEC's permitting process for how and when to consider the impacts on disadvantaged communities under the Climate Act Section 7.3. This requires that agencies' actions have to avert disproportionate burdens on disadvantaged communities, and also prioritizes greenhouse gas emission reduction and co-pollutant reductions in these communities. So the draft policy describes the content of analyses that will be required by DEC staff pursuant to the requirements under 7.3, and it describes the procedures DEC staff will follow when reviewing those analyses for being in conforming with the regulations and requirements under the Climate Act. The policy is based on the requirements under 7.3 of the Climate Act. And it will be a and also Commissioner's Policy 49 or CP 49, which has already been approved. So, like I said, it's consistent with CP 49 in that it applies to major permits subject to the Uniform Procedures Act, and it also applies to new permits, permit modifications, and to permit renewals. It also focuses on potential major emitters of greenhouse gas emissions and co-pollutants. The types of permits, it refers to our air, water withdrawal over, I'm not going to say, I don't know what MGD means, I apologize. For cooling purposes, liquefied natural gas and petroleum gas, solid waste management and industrial hazardous waste. It applies to other UPA permits for projects that involve construction, energy production, energy generation, transmission, storage, and project sources and activities that might even result in greenhouse gas emission or co-pollutant emissions. It requires permit applicants to prepare a disproportionate burden report for all applicable permits to assist agencies in determining whether the permit would result in a disproportionate burden on disadvantaged communities, which is all consistent with 7.3 of the Climate Act. It also identifies the criteria which must be included in a disproportionate burden report, and it requires enhanced public participation consistent with our Commissioner's Policy 29. It focuses on the policy, is focused on permits and projects that involve increased greenhouse gas emissions and co-pollutants, and it builds on the concept of design considerations to achieve measurable emissions reductions consistent with design and mitigation under Section 7.2 of the Climate Act, and utilizing the methodology from the Division of Air Resources Policy DAR 21. So that, the public comment period for this ends on November 27th. So if you haven't had an opportunity to review or to get your draft comments in, I suggest everybody review and get those draft comments in immediately. Oh, ooh, you're on the phone. All right, Eddie has a question. Oh, no, we can't hear you.
You guys hear me?
Can hear you now.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Hi, thanks. So quick question, if the comments are due in a couple of weeks, I remember there was an email exchange following the last climate justice working group when I was asking for DEC to speak to the controller audit's findings in terms of questions regarding DEC's permit renewal activity. And I guess what I'm wondering is, my sense from the email exchange from you all was that there is a briefing that's being scheduled or a meeting with DEC and interested stakeholders that are interested in what DEC's response is to the controller audit. I'm just wondering, is that going to happen before the deadline for these comments are due? Because the deadline for the comments and our comments are tied, at least on some level, but I imagine others would be as well, with whatever DEC has to say regarding some of the troubling audit findings. So I'm just curious, is that briefing going to happen before these comments are due? If not, will an extension to the comment period be granted for those of us who feel like we need that conversation with DEC in order to properly inform our comments?
We can request, so if you are interested in having a comment extension, we can discuss you can put in a request for a comment extension. The goal is trying to respect people's schedules and try to get this briefing scheduled as soon as possible, which might not put it before the end of the comment period. So if that is a concern, absolutely request an extension for the comment period, and we can definitely look into that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions? Okay. All right, I think we still have a little bit of time before Michael is able to jump back on. So I think what I'll do in the next 4 minutes is kind of do a quick jump ahead. Let's just skip to slide 16. And I'll try to remember that I skipped to slide 16 so I don't repeat it again.
I can't actually see what slide number I'm on.
Oh, you are on slide 10.
Okay. 11,
Right.
12,
That's-
13,
yeah.
14, 15,
That's
16?
14. Yes, you did it.
Okay,
Annual
got
review.
it.
So we'll just, and as we've gone over before, for the annual review, we'll be reviewing the criteria annually as we move forward. As we said before, the process that we'll be using is assessing the data availability. So the technical team here, we're going to be reviewing all of the existing indicator data and all the data sources that are on our list for future consideration. That's, data points that we maybe discussed but didn't have enough information on for future consideration. And we'll also be looking to update existing data sets like the census data tracks, as well as, availability of new data. We also want to consider ideas that come from folks outside the Climate Justice Working Group. So we have stated we're still working on trying to figure out the proper way for folks who have suggestions on, how we solicit input from the community, whether or not we do an official sort of comment period or have a deadline by which folks have to submit specific ideas. We're interested in hearing your thoughts. We want to make sure that we're making this fair so people have an opportunity to make suggestions if there are additional methodologies or comments that people would, not comments, indicators that people would like to suggest. So if anybody has any thoughts on how that would work, and how we can make sure that we're addressing people's concerns with regards to the criteria, please let us know. After we've assessed all of the data, we will share our findings with the working group and provide you with the recommendations that we have, if we even have any, for any potential changes to the indicators and methodologies, like adding data sets on diabetes, for example, as we've discussed. Our assessment is going to include a summary of the input that we've heard from New Yorkers throughout the year. So, like I said, any suggestions you have about whether or not that should be sort of like a shortened comment period in order to get that data, whether there should be a deadline, et cetera, we'd love to hear that. After that, we'll convene a working group for deliberation on the recommendations, as well as, anything else working group members would like to include or recommend. If there's a proposed change that would actually change the indicators or change the criteria, we would definitely need to vote on that, so we would need to have a quorum for that. So we're going to be assessing the criteria with an eye towards how those provisions also have been implemented. So some considerations might be, the impact is possibly going to take a few years to actually really measure and understand. So changes to the DAC criteria, they're definitely going to require a really significant administrative lift to inform, all of the agencies and get them to adopt the changes, and kind of ensure that we really are tracking these mechanisms and we're able to actually report on this, especially the investment strategy over the next couple of fiscal cycles. So all of that's going to factor into how we do things. Eddie?
Hi, can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
I'm not sure what exactly to do about this, but, and apologies, I was looking for it before this call and I can't put my hands on it, but I'm assuming other Climate Justice Working Group members received a similar letter from some of the elected official leaders from Southeast Queens who continue to have questions about the criteria that was adopted. I think my sense of how the analysis, or at least how some of the community has how some of this has landed, I believe they were initially, at least some folks in Southeast Queens, thought that none of their community was covered by the criteria. And obviously that's not true. And a number of neighborhoods, a number of areas within Southeast Queens did make it into the criteria, but there are clearly other parts of Southeast Queens that feel like they've not been, I don't know if they feel like they've been overlooked, or whether the application of the criteria was incorrect, or whether the criteria itself is problematic. It's not the first time that we hear this critique from Southeast Queens. So I'm just wondering, to this end, in terms of, since we're going to be talking about how to update criteria in the future, can DEC speak, or any of the other agencies speak to what, if anything, you all are doing to sit down with the elected officials in Southeast Queens to either answer questions or correct assumptions, or maybe even get additional guidance or thoughts for us to consider as we think about updating the criteria. Sorry for the long-winded connection here, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys understood the letter that was triggering this question on my part. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eddie. We have had meetings with residents and with activists from Southeast Queens, as well as legislators elected officials who've reached out to us. We've had multiple conversations on the criteria, how it's being applied, what indicators they feel could potentially be missing, and how this looks moving forward. So one of the conversations we had was about the annual review process, and what that would look like, and whether or not we would consider indicators that have been suggested via public comment period into the disadvantaged communities criteria, which I did let folks know that we would take a look at criteria that was suggested in the past, look at whether or not it's applicable, what the data sources are, and see whether or not that's something the Climate Justice Working Group would include. We also discussed alternative funding for areas that aren't considered disadvantaged communities, reminding folks that the disadvantaged communities criteria just quote unquote sets aside 40% of the investments and benefits from entities. It doesn't apply to the whole, and that there still is funding available, but there are other funding tracks. So we have had conversations with elected officials and community members on what those alternate funding sources might be. So we have listened to folks about their concerns, and we're looking into how we can address them, specifically in Southeast Queens, but also across the area, because there are other areas that have concerns about those specific, census tracts not being within the disadvantaged communities criteria or listed. So we are having conversations with people about, where those data points might, be missing, what we might potentially see when we update those data points to include the 2020 census data, and how we're going to look at soliciting additional potential criteria in the future.
Thanks so much for that.
Absolutely. And I see Michael has joined us. Michael, does anybody else have any questions or hands up before I turn things over to Michael?
It's Jill here.
Hi, Jill.
Hi, I'm just wondering, first of all, I think we should absolutely give the public an opportunity to comment. I'm not sure what alternative there is outside of a public comment period. So I don't really have anything to suggest there. But my question is, would the public comment period be ahead of the analysis and decision if we do decide to change the criteria, or would it be after the amended criteria is voted on and approved, or both?
Well, that's something that we're trying to work out, is exactly what that would look like. We have heard from folks that they would like an opportunity to sort of solicit or submit, additional indicators for consideration, but then they would also like a comment period after we've made our recommendations and the working group has potentially looked at any sort of changes to the disadvantaged communities criteria. So that's something that we can definitely discuss, and how we think that looks, and then sort of apply that to the timeline, because obviously we're going to have to sort of start from when, everything would be, sort of approved and updated, and then work our way back to make sure that we are meeting the requirements under the Climate Act. But that's something that we can definitely work on.
There's no requirement right now to include a public comment period, so we're basically building this now. Okay.
Yep, this would be something that we'd be building in. There's no requirement under the Climate Act to provide that. So we're basically trying to make sure that there's additional transparency and additional public participation. So we'd be building this into the process.
Are we going to figure this out today? I'm just wondering if we're having quarterly meetings and it's now November, and if we're supposed to review the criteria, we voted last March. So I'm just thinking, we need to get started. I'm sure you're already thinking about this, but
definitely thinking
I'm just
about it.
trying to figure out the timeline. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know
so
if
are we going to talk more about this today, or is this like a next meeting kind of thing?
This might be a next meeting type of thing. I'm looking at a couple of timelines that I will probably send out to working group members just for them to review,
Okay.
and then we can
Thanks.
look to discuss. Is that everyone, or do we want to move to Michael? Okay, if we could go back to slide 10. All right, we're going to talk about the investments and benefits guidelines. Michael Romeo has joined us. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Alana. Hi, everybody. Sorry I wasn't here for the first half hour, but happy to be with you now and to talk about where we are with our efforts here on our keeping account of investments and benefits for disadvantaged communities. So, we want to update you on the progress made since we last discussed this. Obviously, this was before my time on the working group, but we discussed this earlier this year, and want to give you an update on how we're thinking about statewide interagency accounting of disadvantaged community investments and benefits. So, going to recap some of this will be familiar territory. Recap some of what we've shared in the past, but we want to give a refresher on that, including what will be included in the framework, or what we're proposing be included in the framework, and including investments and co-benefits as part of this initial report or accounting. And we'll then discuss proposed rules for those specific investment types, followed by some further discussion. We'll let you know that we have been meeting with an interagency advisory group to inform all of this work, as DEC obviously and NYSERDA, but also others, and we've been looking really in depth at associating all of our expenditures and benefits data with specific locations to the degree we can, starting from 2020, which is the period of the Climate Act kicking into place. We're going to talk about what we've learned so far from that and how that's informed what we're recommending here. If we could go to the next slide. I'm sorry, I was on a different slide. If you could go back one slide, sorry about that. So as you look here at our accounting, we want to, again, to begin with, just revisit this. This should be familiar, what you see here, in terms of what we're accounting for, what's included as part of the disadvantaged community investments and benefits under the Climate Act. Number one, the investments must be from a New York State agency, authority, or entity. We'll talk about the federal piece of that. Obviously, if it flows through a state agency, that's included. Number two, investments must be focused on clean energy and energy efficiency. That could be a standalone program that those investments are being done, where the sole focus is on clean energy and energy efficiency, or it could be a component of a program whose main goal is mentioned as part of the Climate Act. And number three, what's within scope here is the investments must be place-based, or in other words, defined to a specific geographic area that is associated with disadvantaged communities. Now, the one caveat there is, so in addition to investments that are going to a particular geography, we also have, because this group came up with it, the addition of low-income households as well, and those are not tied to the specific geography, but that's defined by state median income. Yes, if we could go to the next slide, please. And I'll be sure to stop here and we can talk through anything if people have questions. But again, this is mostly recapping so far, hopefully. So as we look at our reporting here, you know, you can see that this should be, again, a recap of the list of co-benefits that we will be tracking, in addition to dollar investments. So the compliance metric is dollar investments for disadvantaged communities. However, we also know that co-benefits are something that is really about impact in the communities, and that disadvantaged communities are seeing tangible benefits. So that's something we also intend to measure and quantify as best we can. And, you know, even though it's not part of the mandate. So this table represents the co-benefits that we know we can begin tracking immediately across agencies for this initial report. Again, some key considerations here and some constraints for what's in this list and maybe what's not on the list is that the information must be trackable across all agencies for this cohesive statewide report. They also must be something we can immediately track, so not just it's trackable, but something that we can do in the near term. And then third, that we see this, so those are really the two criteria. The third piece is that we know that there may be additional co-benefit metrics that we want to track, that we'd like to track, that we know are valuable to communities, but this is really a continuously evolving process we're looking at. We'd really like to hear from all of you in the working group on, as we move forward here, you know, understand what should we be tracking and work as best we can to determine what is trackable across all the state agencies and working with those agencies. You may notice that from the previous version, the one change here is that indoor air quality is not currently included in as a benefit that is trackable in the near term. That after extensive review of academic literature, there just wasn't enough detail on how to best attribute indoor air quality benefits at this time. You know, there was some limited research out there, but it was very limited to, for example, combustion stoves, which we have very limited investment currently. We know that's going to change over time. So all that said is we do remain committed. We know that indoor air quality is super important to a determinant for health to communities, and we're exploring ways to refine the methodology so that we can include it with a high confidence level going forward. Next slide. Yeah, so this again should be a recap, but for those, as we're looking at programmatic investments for Climate Act disadvantaged communities, in disadvantaged communities to benefit those communities, we break down and, you know, those different investments in two categories. One is place-based investments, and the other is state or system-wide investments, and I'll talk a bit more about what that means. So the disadvantaged communities 40% goal, we you know, are recommending and plan to account for place-based investments, while investments in statewide programs, for example, or in utility grid scale investments, or investments that cover the whole energy infrastructure in the state of New York would not be included in the accounting for this, as we're laying it out here. As we discussed previously, we define place-based investments as those where the benefits may be localizable to a specific site. In other words, you can tie the dollars and the benefits to a specific location on a map, and to a specific place, and potentially a facility or building, what have you, so that we know that we can prioritize initiatives in those ways, for those types of programs, and tailor investments also to individuals and households that meet the criteria we laid out. We would consider state or system-wide investments, you know, to be ones that, like I said, would be excluded from this. However, we do still intend to provide reporting on any benefits tied to these state or system-wide investments that we can show accrue to disadvantaged communities, even if they don't count towards the compliance, you know, metric of 35 to 40% dollars. In a similar manner, we are not planning to count implementation or administration funds that the agencies use for their operations and their administration of programs, given that they are not localizable to in a manner that can specifically benefit disadvantaged communities. There may be qualitative outcomes and benefits that might need, for example, studies, larger or longitudinal multi-year studies and more in-depth evaluations before we would be able to associate specific benefits in a high confidence. You can see some examples here of the kinds of place-based examples that come to mind and the state or system-wide type examples that would be excluded from the accounting here. Or in other words, the denominator of the calculating the 35 to 40%. Next slide. Okay, so what you see here are some examples of how we would attribute the investments in disadvantaged communities. You know, you can see here the top example here is related to multifamily affordable housing. You know, since we last met on this topic as a working group, the various agencies have been working to compile investment data since 2020 that goes back to 2020 and looking to, again, put as much of it on a map at a location as possible. And we're talking about just an ungodly amount of data we've had to go through to try to do that with every single piece of data to associate that to a location for this to meet this criteria. And in doing so, we've noted that there are a few investment types that do not fit neatly into what we're trying to do here. There isn't precision here. So in those cases, we are looking at some solutions. So in the case of multifamily affordable housing, we are proposing counting 40% of investments in multifamily affordable housing as low income. And this is based on working with state and city housing authorities to do a comprehensive inventory of their portfolios and found that across those portfolios, approximately 40% of residents in that affordable housing were at or below 60% of the state median income, which is the eligibility threshold that's behind the disadvantaged communities criteria. So yeah, this is just an example of, you know, using the data to be able to estimate, you know, when it comes to these kinds of investments where we don't actually have income data for every single resident in every single multifamily building directly as part of the programs that we have currently today. The community solar is another example that we're looking at. You know, and you know, we could track either by the location of the project or the location of the subscribers to the community solar projects funded by state programs. We believe, of course, not surprisingly, the primary benefit of these projects is to the individual subscribers and not where the project is located. So we do not want to just incentivize placement of community solar within disadvantaged communities if they're not going to directly benefit. So, you know, our intention is to use that as the primary basis. Unfortunately, subscriber data isn't currently attainable for some programs. So, you know, where that data is not available, you know, we may look at, we're recommending that agencies use a percentage determined from an evaluated sample of the subscribers for those projects in which are disadvantaged communities residents. And then the community-wide investments. This actually is something that we are still, actually, I'm going to skip over that actually. Well, I can explain in a bit, but workforce training. So going to workforce training, we're looking at, you know, obviously similar to the community solar, we could be looking at where the training sites are located and or who's being trained. And so for programs that are targeting individuals, we are recommending that individuals, that the tracking be of individuals that reside within disadvantaged communities, and that be what counts toward the 40% goal. For programs that are focused on investing in training facilities, so not the people part, but the facilities themselves that offer the training, we recommend that counting towards the goal of the training center, if the training center is located within a disadvantaged community.
Can I ask
So
a
if we-
question?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Jill.
Hi,
Jill
Jill.
Hink. Hi, I am still trying to wrap my head around how we're incorporating individuals who make 60% of the state median income into our programs. And this is helpful, but I also think it's making me more confused. But that's good because that means I'm closer to understanding it. But my specific question is, when we're talking about community solar in workforce training, if you're looking at the individual subscribers to see where they're located, have you also considered looking at the individual subscribers to consider if they are low income? And the same for the workforce training element. And I know that there's a lot of privacy around income, but I'm just wondering where that comes into play here.
Yes, so thanks for that question, Jill. I appreciate your grappling with it. It's really important, what you're asking here. So yes, we would be looking at low income subscribers as eligible as well. I'm sorry if that wasn't clear in what I just stated, but of course that's in part based on the programs, right? In some cases, that income is collected, perhaps maybe in other cases. That information wasn't available as part of, again, we're talking about historic look back at data. So in some cases that data isn't available. So that's where some of this like evaluation I was just talking about comes into play. But yes, to answer your question, it is not just the geography, it is also whether or not they're low income that would qualify.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Rawa from Buffalo.
Hi, Rawa.
Yeah, so my question is, on the workforce training piece, yes, the first one, I think it's great. I think I got a little bit confused with number 2. Would it also mean that, yes, a training center or wherever the trainees are is located in what is considered a DAC? But does it also mean that we are asking that entity to provide information on who their trainees are? Are they LMI folks, or are they just a bunch of, I don't know, well-off people that like live in the area that want to get trained up in, say, solar or electrical work to be able to install solar on the roof? But the facility happens to be in a DAC, but the majority of its trainees are not considered low income and would not fit into a DAC requirement.
Yeah, I think what we're proposing is if we're talking about the training or what the state funding is being used for, if it's being used to pay for individuals to be trained, then the criteria, what would qualify is that individual. Do they reside within a disadvantaged community, a designated disadvantaged community? Alternatively, if it's training for the facility, which maybe was your question, Rawa, we are proposing that if that facility is located within a disadvantaged community, then we would count that as investing in training that facility is based within that community, that we would count that towards the investment in disadvantaged communities, but open to feedback on that.
Yeah, I guess, my feedback is there a way to be able to collect information on who is being trained in that facility? And I'm not saying that the trainees cannot be diverse, but what I'm saying is in order for it to be able to get the investment for it to be a DAC, I think it really needs to be able to show that the majority of the trainees are households that either reside in a DAC or are low income themselves. And I think that that could be data that any workforce training center would have readily.
Yeah, that's some great feedback. I think.
Yeah, my reason for saying that, Michael, is right now, those of us that are working in community with community-based projects, they're building affordable housing and or a lot of the renewable technology within our communities. We are having a really challenging time with our construction firms that we have to work with because that's not what we do. So general contractors will adhere to our workforce training, and we want, you know, men and women that are from our own community that need to be upskilled in these new technologies to be able to get the jobs. But unfortunately, we have not enough people in our community, and the people that they're connected to, because they happen to be mostly affluent, you know, white general contractors, like their goals are not equity, right? And we're asking them to be equitable. And so they're doing the search wherever they are. So they're farming folks out from Pennsylvania and other locations and more rural communities that they're connected to be the workforce in our community. And so I think the reason why I think this is a critical issue, and we need to put some caveats on this, is that this will encourage those who are doing the training to go outside of kind of like where, you know, their normal sort of areas and really look for and begin to advertise in communities of color, low income, poor communities, to be able to get, you know, new workers for us to invest in. And I think that was the intent of the CLCPA provision.
Yeah, again, this is some great feedback. Yeah, clearly, I think some of the thinking here is, you know, having training within the communities is really important to access, right?
Yes.
But yeah, at the same time, if there is this pattern, like you're talking about, that we want to correct for and encourage greater engagement of the community, I think it's a fair point. I think the question we'll have to see is where, you know, what data is available when it comes to these investments in facilities. But yeah, I think, again, some of this is an issue of when looking back, there might be limited data, but maybe it's something that could be factored in looking forward.
I think that if any training facility within a DAC that's going to be getting an investment should be required to be able to give you whatever data. I think that's what I say caveat. I mean, those are the things that we need to build into whatever the investment is going to be. And the reason why I say that is, like, we built into our RFP request, or when we're sending things out to bid, to include our equity standards as part of the bid package, so that we're not getting, you know, there's no BS on the back end of it, if you will, right? We want to be front and center with the expectation here is, in the understanding that if you're going to bid on our projects, is that we require these things, right? And if any training facility, which I think is amazing, that is currently residing within a DAC that's going to be getting this investment, should be told upfront what the expectations are. If we're told upfront what it is, they can easily collect that data from people that are coming to them to be trained up. That, I mean, it could be just a couple more questions on their form, for example. Thank you. I'll end there.
Thanks, Rawa. If there's no other questions, I could move. There's still a couple more slides here I can talk through, but I'm happy to take more questions if there are any. Actually, I think there is a question in the chat.
Oh,
Oh, did somebody just speak? Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, this is Sonal from React. I had some questions, but happy to have you take the chat ones first.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying
If that
to.
was mine?
Yeah, maybe it was Eddie. Do you,
Yeah, thanks,
do you want to
Michael.
ask
Yeah,
it?
Sure. I guess my question was, I get earlier you mentioned the difficulties in tracing or tracking indoor air improvements, but I'm wondering for outdoor air, especially for large facilities, is that something you guys are intending on tracking? For example, like, clearly there are going to be emissions reductions that'll be quantifiable if, for example, you replace a peaker power plant with battery storage and clean energy renewables, and with all the offshore, well, hopefully, fingers crossed, with offshore wind and transmission lines coming on, we can chart that progress. So that was the first question, whether you guys are intending on tracking any of that, which of course will also be helpful with the DEC air quality program that we're going to be talking about for next year. And I had an additional question. I think it's a pretty straightforward one. Clearly, the federal money, IRA, infrastructure, all the federal dollars are going to be flowing through state agencies. Those will be likely be tracked the way we track any state expenditure, right? Like we'll be capturing federal money and how we apply the DAC, right? The 35%, probably pretty straightforwardly by just tracking how the agency spends it. But again, I just want to say that because I know others have raised that individually to different kinds of working group members. So just want to make sure that that is in fact accurate.
Yeah, Eddie, I'll answer that straight off and say, yes, like you said, federal dollars that flow through the state. Obviously, there are federal dollars that don't flow through the state, so those aren't really something that we are able to track. At least it's part of this reporting that we have right here, set up the framework we have here. But I think you're pointing to this massive federal, the largest federal investment in clean energy ever that's happening now through the combination of different, Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Act and CHIPS and Science Act in particular, that are a huge opportunity for the state. And so, yes, any of those dollars that come to any of the state agencies that are clean energy investments, those would be counted as part of the state tracking. Now, the only caveat here I do want to make sure is aware is depending on the federal funding source, some of the federal funding allows states to use their own definition for disadvantaged communities. Others require the use of the federal criteria for disadvantaged communities out of the Justice 40 program. There's 80% census tracts, so this one and the same for the state and the federal, so there's a lot of overlap there. But nonetheless, we will be tracking where those dollars are going and able to report according to the Climate Act framework that we have here. And then to I think your other question that's in the chat around, and the one you just mentioned around air monitoring. Yeah, I think want to clarify that yes, there is monitoring that will be happening from the state. You mentioned DEC's Community Air Monitoring Program. That's actually going to be measuring directly the air quality in those hotspots. However, for the climate justice, for the disadvantaged communities report that we're talking about here, we are not specifically measuring outdoor air quality across the whole state at every different point. We're using factors. So we're basically using a model to determine what the associated emissions reductions are when we have energy savings or when we put new renewables on and take dirtier sources off the grid. So those would be, we are able to determine the impact on outdoor air quality from that methodology. Hope that answers your question.
Hi, it's Alana, and I can just jump in and say that, obviously DEC is going to be we can track a lot of this through our own air quality and air monitoring programs, as well as using the data that was compiled through the Community Air Monitoring Program that did track those hotspots, and also our regulatory monitors.
Thank you.
And Sonal, I think, was next.
Thanks, Alana. I have a couple questions on what Eddie brought up around the indoor air quality. I assume you're tracking at, like, will you, if you're not doing indoor air quality, are you going to track at the building level, especially for housing? So, you know, you'd imagine if a boiler gets replaced, you're going to see an improvement in air quality in that area if it's like a massive building, you know, or even smaller, like 1 to 4 family buildings or single family homes like that. There's also a measurable impact there. So that's one question, just to get at some of that indoor air quality stuff. My other question is building on what Robert brought up around the employment piece. I think there's a couple things that jump out to me as missing. One is ownership. Are you tracking who owns work, whether that's organizations, companies, cooperatives, you know, ownership within DACs that is rising via clean energy opportunities? And I think that's something that we should absolutely find a way to track and encourage, considering that ownership is key to doing our part in reducing a wealth gap and sort of intergenerational wealth gaps. And I think on that, that also brings me to the metrics for the workforce training too. So how are we actually tracking who owns the companies and nonprofits that are doing this kind of work? And then similar to that, what about contractors, MWBE contractors? That's something that's not mentioned here. And obviously NYSERDA has a huge role to play in the diversity of contractors that NYSERDA and the state is working with. And I think that would be critical to also be encouraging a more equitable array of contractors in the workforce.
Yeah, thanks. I think that was a 3-part question. So I'll try to do my best here. So on the combustion piece, building or site combustion I think that's what I heard you say when it comes to building emissions reductions, right, from energy upgrades.
Yep.
You know, I think our intention is that we would be able to associate local air quality benefits from energy, you know, fossil fuel savings, right, reductions from the removal, particularly of combustion appliances. For example, replacing with a heat pump. So I think we have it. I think the issue, the qualifier here is that I think we have that at we'll be able to have that at the census tract level, but we aren't able to report for I think privacy and for reasons at the individual site level. So that would be reportable at the tract level, the census tract level. So I think that answers question number 1. Number 2 is around ownership. I am not clear that I think it's good feedback on what, again, a lot of this is we're looking at right now, a lot of the exercises on looking at what data we have from the existing programs. And I do not believe within this initial report that we have information on the ownership of specific, if that will be tracked and reported, I guess is what I'm saying. That, you know, again, a lot of this gets to protection of privacy, you know, concerns of that nature. Yeah, I'm just, we have to work over time to look at how we could do that, but that's not current part of the initial reporting plan. I would say this, as far as the MWBE contractors and jobs and development opportunities there, I know states have, state agencies have responsibilities for tracking and reporting on their MWBE contractors in many cases. However, for this reporting, we're focused on jobs created directly from the investments and the workforce training piece. Those are the 2 that have been arrived at as ones that are ones that we can use the data that we have available, I believe. We don't, like, for example, here at NYSERDA, I can just tell you that we don't, outside of our own implementation resources that I said are outside of the scope here, that's the administration here that we do. That's where we currently track. We don't, this is something I know we need to do more of, we need to do better of, but when it comes to looking back, that information just isn't available, but is something that I think we should be thinking about as we move forward, and would like to see what we can do as we move forward on that point.
Yeah, I think that's similar to what Rava was saying, is that we have to think about how to embed the correct tracking tools in the work, because the intention is that this is, benefits and investments is going to be something that goes on for many, many, many years. And that, if this is information that's currently not being tracked, to me, that seems like a glaring gap. I mean, we won't get into discussion of what the utility should or should not be tracking, but I think that also becomes an important part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, I think some of it too is that I think minority and women-owned business enterprises, MWBEs, are not, I think, currently part of the, or weren't specifically written into the Climate Act and aren't currently something, again, like I said, that we have the data on, but it's something I think we're very mindful of is important to ensure equity and local wealth creation. So definitely something we're interested to look at as we move forward here.
Yeah, Michael, this is Rawa again from Buffalo. Thank you so much, Sonal. What Sonal said just kind of made me think of another thing too, is we really should be looking at the workforce training centers and looking at their staff, right? What is the percentage of BIPOC folks that are either residing in DACs, and, just an analysis of where they're coming from. Another thing that just escaped my head. All right, you'll have to come back to me, I forgot.
Yeah, happy to. Just let me know if once it occurs to you. I know how that goes. Yeah, seeing lots of support from others in the working group. Yeah, clearly this is something we needed to talk more about and figure out.
Hey, Michael, what occurred to me is I don't know if we need to put MWBE requirements, but if we do, I think that it might be a barrier for a lot of folks, in particular in our communities, trying to get their MWBE status is a big lift. I don't want that to be prohibitive. I don't think it's the only thing that we should be looking at. I think there are a lot of MWBE businesses that are in operation that are not registered with New York State right now because that process is just too challenging.
Yeah, that's something we often hear. So great point, Rawa. Okay, so yeah, I think if we can move to the next slide. So what you see here is our statewide interagency disadvantaged communities investments and co-benefits timeline. So we're expecting, we really want to make sure we're very transparent here about the plan, and that's what this is trying to do here is for our plan for how we're going to be accounting for. Again, this is a look back on what the investments that have been made since 2020 have been. Later this month, our plan is to release a draft of all the documents associated with these guidelines for a 30-day public comment period. Of course, though there may be some issues along the way, or that may slightly delay things a little bit, but our hope is to stay as much on this timeline as we can to be able to have and issue and publish information about statewide disadvantaged communities investments and benefits by May of next year, if all things go according to plan here. So I think that's actually the last of my slides. Happy to, if I've missed questions, I would ask for some help from others here because it's a lot to track.
Still here. I have hopefully a quick question. Could you go back to that last slide, please? It looks like your public comment period is supposed to open very soon. Is that still the plan?
Yeah, our intention is, I think this is where, again, we've been working with an interagency advisory group to look at what is, we've started with an inventory of potentially applicable programs a while back, and then we've been working on these guidelines that we're going to be releasing for public comment, and we want to get those out for comment so that we can then look at what we can do as part of this initial report versus what might be something that's more feasible to do as part of a next phase. Because again, this is meant to be a ongoing, even more so than the criteria, right? Like how we're tracking benefits. I think as we build the state's capacity to track data, we want to be able to reflect that in what we're reporting on for the benefits and the investments. So yeah, our intention would be to share what's been developed with this interagency group for public comment later this month, towards the end of this month, and then have that 30-day public comment period to then be in a position to actually have some information available, like I said, by May or so of next year. I think the balance here is obviously wanting to have some information that's public that hopefully provides a good baseline and a good set understanding of what we've accomplished the past few years, and then look at, okay, as we move forward, what should we be doing differently? I think some of the questions that have been raised here are excellent questions, and they point to the need to have, there's a lot more we need to be doing besides this reporting, or to inform this reporting and to inform how we advance a more inclusive clean energy transition. So I think we're looking here at how are we on track here with the 35% mandate, 40% goal? Where do we stand on those things from an investments, and then to the degree we can track co-benefits? And then as we move forward, okay, what more should we be thinking about? What other things to measure would be really helpful to understanding this, the transition here, and are we really benefiting communities in the way that was intended here with the Climate Act?
Could you go back to the timeline, the slide? Thank you.
This is Abby. I have a question, and I apologize if you said this and I just missed it in the flow of things. But if I'm recalling correctly, back from when this process was first introduced many, many months ago, I believe that the intention was to kind of first implement it and figure it out within NYSERDA, and then figure out what it means for the other agencies and help the other agencies to figure out how to implement this. I'm curious where the other agencies are at in their process at this point, and if there is kind of a evolving understanding of within other agencies what of their programs will or will not be included in this, and just any updates around that you could provide.
Yeah, so we have at NYSERDA been compiling this. You may be aware, or maybe not, but we are actually, as of tomorrow, NYSERDA and the utilities are submitting some information for consideration. Ultimately, it'll be submitted or made available to maybe soon thereafter around our a lot of the what we're talking about here today in response to a order from the Department of Public Service and the Public Service Commission. So we will have an initial some initial data from just at least NYSERDA and the utilities along these lines of investments in disadvantaged communities. Again, this is coming out of a separate, entirely separate requirement that was from an order from a couple of years, or 2 or 3 years back now, and that we're responding to for DPS. So some of that information will be available very soon. So you'll have a window into where we are seeing things, at least here at NYSERDA on the utilities, but that is separate from the statewide reporting, where we are looking to still get input and work with our other agency partners to see what we can compile as a whole state when it comes to clean energy investments. So yes, we have been doing some of that compiling, and that will be available soon for you to see, for the public to see. But as far as other agencies, like I mentioned, we have been working with them, other agencies, to advise on this. And we did do an initial inventory, asked about a dozen agencies at least, for what programs they think would be applicable to the Climate Act, and compiled that as like an initial sense of what are we looking at here. That informed some of our thinking and working with this interagency working group. And so, we're looking to make this guidebook available and actually work with those agencies. Like you can see here, release guidance to state agencies. That would come after the public comment period, once we've factored in any feedback. And then once that's released, we would then work with those state agencies to populate the templates that we've created. So that would be a lot of work. Again, I think we're seeing this likely being something that will be, agencies would build capacity over time to be able to report more data. Mindful again that as we're looking back, some of that data might not be available or be associated with a, easily reportable here. So I hope that answers enough of your question. Again, I think once this is released and once we compile the data for statewide reporting, we'll then have a much clearer picture of what. That's again one of the reasons why I think we're pushing for trying to get this out for public comment, and then hopefully address what we can for this initial report, as well as look to what might make more sense to include in future iterations, so that we can get a report or a publishing of information for the public by May. Any other comments or questions?
All right. Thanks, Michael. Oh, Eddie said his hand up. Sorry.
I had a quick one. I'm so sorry. Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Quick question. What about agencies like Empire State Development Corporation and those that I just want to make sure that all agencies, and not just like quasi-public agencies as well, are also are expected to participate with this, correct?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Eddie. Yes, so all agencies that have clean energy and energy efficiency programmatic investments are included as part of this this accounting here. So that would include USD.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other hands up, thank you, Michael, for that presentation. I know that we went a bit over your, time slot and you're away at your retreat, so thanks so much for jumping in. And I guess we'll let you get back to your retreat. But folks, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free. You can definitely email Michael. He can definitely respond to your inquiries.
It's an important conversation. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay.
All right, bye. So we can move on to, we already did a review. So before we go over next steps, I kind of wanted to jump back to something, to what Jill brought up earlier with regards to the timeline and trying to incorporate a public comment period and how that will look moving forward. And since we have a little bit of time, I wanted to engage folks on that to see if there are any opportunities or any sort of ideas that folks want to throw around about that, or if you guys want to, I don't know, take a little extra time to think about it, or if you want to kind of sort of, you know, discuss some things right now.
Do we have hi, it's Jill. Do we have
Hi.
an option to have just like a form on the Climate Justice Working Group website that's like submit your comments and then have an official public comment period after if we do revise the criteria?
That doesn't sound like something that couldn't be done. It doesn't sound like that should be too terribly complicated, but I'm not the one who runs the website, so I don't want to make that statement ahead of time, but that's definitely something that I can look into to see if there is a comment form that we can just have that lives on our, you know, website that just lets people submit comments, and then we can make sure that we're scheduling an official comment period for after we sort of review sort of the draft revisions, if there are any. I think that's a good option. Anyone else want to add to that or have an idea for what that looks like? Does that look good for folks?
Hey, Alana, I just wanted to respond to Jill's second suggestion. Any public comment type period would need to be before the vote is taken, because that's what you would be considering. You know, those public comments would be considered for the actual change in criteria if you do decide to have a change in criteria. So it wouldn't be able to take place after the vote, it would be beforehand.
So I think we were thinking between the working group receiving, you know, that making any sort of like draft sort of, you know, potential draft revisions and then having that go out for public comment and then having a vote. I think that's what, right? Is that what you were thinking, Jill? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, but thank you, Lisa, for clarifying that.
I think I saw Abby, you had your hand up?
Yeah. So, you know, first want to recognize that this being our first year, we probably will need to evolve the process as, you know, years go on. And so hoping that we don't have to lock ourselves into this is how it will always be done from year one. But my sense is that, you know, both for the climate justice working groups and the public, it would be useful to start with just a briefing on how are we doing before we have any deliberation about what could or should change. And that be something that, you know, perhaps there is an opportunity for the public to ask questions at that time or in some format. So to start with that as an initial step in the process would be my suggestion. And then also, I wonder if we need to have some kind of cadence where maybe on a kind of regular annual basis, we are considering small tweaks, but, you know, as you mentioned earlier, someone mentioned earlier, we're not going to really see the impacts of this work or much of it for a few years out. So I, you know, again, just throwing this out there, wonder if it makes sense for us to go into this with the intention of saving very major revisions for perhaps a few years in. I'd be curious what other climate justice working group members think about that, of course.
Eddie, you had your hand up?
Yes, hi, and thanks, Abby, for asking that. I was actually wondering the same, but I didn't know whether or not this had been addressed at the beginning of the call when I was having trouble logging on. But yeah, I mean, so I think based on what I just heard Abby ask, that was like the very first question I had, which was, you know, most people tweak and revisit criteria after an initial set of criteria has been developed, applied, then analyzed, right? So like, I don't know how best to adjust the criteria, whether it's incrementally or as Abby's rightfully warning, like, overtly or in a significant way. How can we make that kind of educated call without even having a semblance of a sense of just how successful the initial set of criteria is? And so, yeah, I don't know if you all have talked about that or what the thinking is, but it feels, pretty premature to talk about adjusting criteria before one's had an opportunity to analyze the initial application of the first set of criteria. So just wondering what are your thoughts are about that?
Do you want to?
This is Amy. I guess, my only thought is from this initial perspective that it would be if there was some glaring error that occurred, based on the criteria that, we're hearing feedback on, that would be something to be looking at.
And with regards to that, the legislation requires us to review it every year, but it doesn't require us to actually make changes. So like Amy said, if we see something that, maybe sticks out immediately between, when we first voted on the final criteria to when we look at it again and we see that there's definitely something that's pointing out, that would be something that would definitely be revised. For example, we're going to be updating the census tract data to reflect the 2020 census. So that's something that we definitely need to make sure that we're voting on. But as we move on and move forward, the legislation requires that we review it, not necessarily change it every year. So that would sort of, if we don't see anything that's jumping out and things appear to be lining up, or we haven't had enough time, in looking at it to see whether or not certain things are making changes, we don't have to make a change immediately. I don't know if that helps.
It does. Thank you.
This is Jill. I've talked to a lot of people who have a lot of concerns and suggestions, and I think a big part of that is misinformation. I am hopeful that we can at least incrementally improve the data that's informing the criteria this year. I think we were all, I was a little disappointed with the transparency around data availability last year when we voted on the criteria, but I hear you. I understand that it's going to take a couple years to really gauge whether or not the criteria we put together is the right one. I think we still need to take this opportunity to take comment from other people, because I think outside of the worlds that we live in, people are applying for grants and people are seeing rejections that are connected to disadvantaged communities criteria, and they're going to want to at least voice their concerns. So I think the investment report and the public comment, once that's available, I think will help inform this decision. I think doing a preliminary comment period unofficially, I think will help inform the criteria. I don't think it needs to be overhauled. Like, I'm still confident in the criteria that we decided on last March. I just think it's premature to decide if we're going to make big changes or small changes until we receive more information.
Alex is, who is on? Alex, did you have anything you wanted to add with regards to the data and data availability?
Yes, and for some reason my camera is on the weird one. Okay. Yeah, I can say that one of the things I think we, as we just discussed, want to do this year is refresh things to the 2020 census and update the data that we can. And on the working group kind of site, you can actually look at all the different data that we've ever considered and those that are in the criteria and where the sources are from, and kind of any potential refresh that we can do. So this year, I think, while structurally it might behoove us to wait for large scale changes. I think updating to the 2020 census is really important. I will remind everyone we did wait on that because we wanted to assess the amount of bias that it was potentially there. And so Loom from kind of bias of non-response based because of the issues surrounding the 2020 census. And so right now, we found for New York State that the bias is not quite there. Like we're not as concerned as we were earlier, which is great news, which means that we can update those census tracts and get that. So that's what I would recommend that we do is refresh those data so that we're getting the most recent data for all of those. And I think, Alana, I think it's worthwhile for the next meeting to really prepare kind of a discussion, even if we don't have every data point ready yet, because it's an undertaking to refresh everything. But it seems like if the working group is curious and wants to know that and learn that, we can have a discussion and kind of show the plan of what we plan to do, if that's okay with you all, Alana.
I think that should be fine. We can't get, too far ahead, but, I think that, we just want to make sure that folks, reiterate that, the technical team, will review the criteria and will make recommendations for the working group to deliberate on. And we are still, we're basically, when we have recommendations, obviously, at the end, we're going to share them, but when we're looking, and I was just having a meeting on what things look like, looking at the 2020 census, I think that's definitely something that we can definitely make sure that we have that for our meeting.
I also want to add, if the working group members are hearing specific kind of feedback that we're not getting, we at Loom would love to hear it so that we can kind of get more ground truthed perspective on things. This is just a long-term plan, not a short-term kind of fix. But if you're hearing about specific, feedback from constituents in the areas that you're representing, I think it's really good for us to have that. Again, having that ground truth, perspective is really, really important for us to be able to, in the long term, assess, the DAC definition and criteria.
Thanks, Alex. Jill, does that address some of your concerns?
Yes, and I would love a data presentation from Alex. Thanks for suggesting it.
All right. Well, that kind of goes into our next steps. So that actually kind of changes my next steps a little bit, but that's okay. So what I'll be doing is, because we want to make sure that we are plotting our next meetings for the future sort of ahead of time so that everybody has them on their calendar and can already plan ahead for that. So I'll be sending around an email sort of initially, and what I need from all of you is just dead times when you will not, absolutely, when you already know you have something available, when you know that this is definitely a date that is not, or time that is not available for you in 2024. I know that you probably already had tons of, invitations to conferences, to, other things like dead time, what's that? Just dates that are absolutely 100% non-negotiable, unavailable. If those don't exist at this time, then that's great for me, because then I can sort of throw things on your schedule now so you have them ahead of time. But if you already know about dates that are not going to be workable, send those along to me, and then I'll be able to use that to generate a poll for the next few months, so we can make sure that we're meeting quarterly and that everybody time is being used appropriately and everyone knows exactly when and where they're supposed to meet. Does that work for everyone? And I think what I meant to say was blackout dates, Eddie, but I don't know why. I just kind of automatically went to dead time. All right. So I'll be looking to share that with folks, but are there any questions? right, I'm not seeing any hands up. Just know that if there are any questions that kind of jump into your minds after we're done, feel free to email me with anything. If you have any questions on the presentation or any questions, again, that are specific to the benefits and investments guidelines, Michael also can answer questions. If there are any questions about air monitoring, et cetera, feel free to send them along. The goal will be to send that email out to everybody by the end of the week. I want to try to make sure that I'm not asking you guys to, focus too much on climate justice working group information as you're getting ready for the holidays. And we will also be sending around some dates for those, the sort of update meeting on the comptroller's audit as well. So keep an eye out for those emails. All right. So thank you everyone for jumping on. I know everyone's very, very busy, and I know it's not always convenient to go to physical locations. I'm always fighting the fight to try to get us back virtual, but thank you again for joining us. Reach out to me with any questions or concerns, and this will be the last Climate Justice Working Group meeting for this year, and we will absolutely, again, have things plotted out for 2024. All right, so if I don't see you again, which I will because you'll probably all be in the meeting regarding the comptroller's report, have a Happy New Year and holidays, and thank you so much. All right, bye everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.